questions, and I think we've had 53 questions, and that includes the ones that we've already answered. So the passion in the room to kind of so I've been desperately trying to just pick out some common themes. So I'm going to invite all of our panelists back to join us for the Q&A session. I know we're going to lose Maria early doors, so she's got to go in a few minutes. So Maria, there's loads of landscape questions for you. And as for all panelists, we will be sent, if we can't get to them, we won't get to everything in the next, in the Q&A session. We will try and kind of get some response from the panelists and squeeze them back. But I am going to kickstart, if you like, with just a sort of, in a sense, the key question of the evening is 100,000 new homes and that target of 30% by 30% of land delivering for nature. Can you do both? And what gives? So we're going to have to get really brief with these answers. We've got lots of questions to get through, and there's just a few things I want to bring into that question. So a really interesting one about the standard method. I thought you were very on script, both of you, about the standard method, but an interesting question in the chat about that shift of numbers to rural Dorset, and how does that fit with delivering for nature as well? And one of the things that's come through quite a lot in the chat is about the house building industry. So you mentioned deliverability. A few people mentioned deliverability. So can we do this well with the house building industry we've got? So the central question really is about, can we do both? Can we do both those? And what do we need to change to do it? If you think you can, and if not, where are your worries? So sorry, but it's about 10 questions in one, and I'm looking just for very brief answers. So Imogen, do you want to go first on that? Are you worried about 100,000 new homes in Dorset?
Yes, is a short answer. It can be done. Will it, in terms of not, having a net impact on nature? There are plenty of examples of nature positive development. So we know it's possible. Will it happen like that if there is that number of houses? I have my doubts. When it's scaled up, they're not all going to be exemplars. And we've already seen from the research that Cllr and Malcolm were going to present that things go wrong. So that is the concern. The scale of it just increases that opportunity for things to go wrong.
Great, thank you. Maria, I'm going to come to you next. So I know you've got to go, but maybe does thinking landscape in landscape terms help us? And one of the big questions that came up in the chat is, the relationship between landscape and nature's recovery, landscape-led design and nature's recovery. I wondered if, just before you leave us, if you could just touch on some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's making them not mutually exclusive, I guess. And I think just in terms of also delivering high numbers of houses, and I know CPRE have done some research on this, but facilitating good quality, smaller scale schemes, because I think those schemes are much more likely to be landscape led, include good provisions for nature conservation, as opposed to, as we saw from Malcolm and Cllr's presentation, the bigger house builders who kind of put all these measures in and none of it gets delivered. So I think just trying to work with those smaller volume house builders, and also I think that's the type of development that people actually need. They don't necessarily want to move into a dormitory suburb. They want to live close to where they grew up, close to their family. So I echo what Imogen said.
Okay,
it's possible, but challenging. But I think that's one of the key routes. And I think the planning system puts up so many barriers that a lot of these small volume house builders are just, it's not worth it for them. And we get left with the big boys who don't play nice.
Yeah. One of my favourite stats is that we are unusual in Europe. Less than 10% of our homes in this country are custom or self-build. In the rest of Europe, it's at least 50%. In Austria, it's 80%. So there's something about the industry we have created in this country that I think has a role to play as well. Thank you, Maria. And I know you've got to go, but thanks so much for your contribution. Matt, I'm going to come to...
for a little while.
Hang on for a little while. I might get another question your way then. Matt, I was going to get to your question. 100,000 new homes, the way we're doing them at the moment, what will that do to our water?
Well, really interesting what you just said about self-build. because in Germany a lot more homes are self-built, and because they charge for rain that leaves the curtilage of the property, they've seen a huge uptake in rainwater harvesting as a result. So there's that harnessing nature, mimicking nature. We don't do that. We don't do that. And so from a water perspective, it's not going to be sustainable if you're still dragging water from miles away to fill your toilet systems and then sending the rain miles away to the, down to the sewage works, or better to the edge of the development, but it's still not mimicking nature. So it's quite simple principles to follow to be more water sustainable, but we don't have the rules in place. We don't have the economic incentives in place, and it's not happening.
But to just push you a bit on that one, so would the conclusion of that be, if we don't change, then it's not possible to deliver 100,000 homes without serious impacts on water quality and supply?
It's not sustainable in the term of sustainability. It's not as sustainable. I mean, generally, human beings are not particularly sustainable on this planet. We tend to, have a greater impact on this planet than all animals. But we were trying to make it more sustainable. So it's how far can you go? And, nature is a resource to be looked after. There's plenty of rain. We just don't build the right assets to look after it. So we could be far more sustainable if we just harnessed nature and then mimicked it. Okay. Whether or not that is totally sustainable. When I see homes that are sold as carbon net zero, rubbish, absolute rubbish. They are not net zero. You haven't seen how much energy we stick into the water to get it to your taps, and how much it costs to treat the wastewater. So if we are serious, we've got to think more about the wider impacts of new development. Where's the water coming from? Where's the wastewater going to? And trying to mimic nature as much as possible there will make it more sustainable.
Great. I'm going to move us on, just because we've got a lot to get through. So, Millie, Nick, just on this point of deliverability and, can we do both? I can sort of feel the answer, but I don't. But what are your worries, though? Where do you think? And if I gave you a truth bill, what would you really say about the standard method and its allocation? And where do you think, what might you want to change on that?
So I think we've been extremely non-political at this point, but I do want to, what I would say, just to kind of bring the political point in, is do I think that this will fundamentally address our housing need challenges? Absolutely not. And do I think that it will threaten the environment that we care so deeply about? I think it will. So, it gives you an idea of my political leanings. However, at the same time, I think that there are some, we recognise that as a challenge, and how we're going to tackle that is really kind of our problem, and what we want to and how we're going to get over some of those challenges is going to be really, really difficult. We're not under any illusion that we're up against it. I would say I think density plays a really important role, particularly in our very urban area in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. We're going to be looking at development, particularly around our town centres, our district centres, anywhere where we can get more people living in a much more efficient way. Just to give an example, I live in a row of 11 homes. It used to be 3 bungalows. And what it means is that the footprint hasn't actually grown. It's still the same footprint, but we have a lot more housing delivery on a small site to be able to accommodate. So there's really good ways. And I think the government are trying to drive a level of innovation. But what I do really want to say is around speculative development. If we fall into a place where we do not have local plans, we do not have allocations, we will be at the mercy of those developers and the money makers that they are because of the nature of the business. It is really, really important that we do get our local plans built in the best way that we can do. And I certainly want to work with our communities to be able to do that. And I would always say to someone, how would you do it? If you've got to deliver 100,000 homes across Dorset, where would you put them? And I think that's the challenge I very much give to my own councillors in BCP. 76 councillors, where would you put these homes? Because you can't just say, well, it's not going to be in my ward. So as much as it is going to be challenging, I think we're ready for that challenge. We're under no illusions that it's definitely not going to be easy, but we really want to work proactively and in the spirit of the fact that this is now legislation, work within that framework with our communities.
I get the bind you're in, and thanks for the point about speculative development, really important. Nick, quickly on this one, and then I'll move on to another question.
I would just echo most of what Millie said. Speculative development is already happening. We don't have local plans, either of us. Particularly Dorset Council, they were mostly written 15 odd years ago. But in the end, if we're going to submit something, we have to either give very good reasons why we're not going to hit the targets or hit the targets. We have a lot more land. Nominally, but actually a lot of it is constrained by SSIs, national landscapes. So where you can build is constrained. Do I think we're gonna, we've got to hit 55,000 homes over our local plan period? I think I really would like to see expansions on villages in terms of small scale. So the area where I live, and I sat on the planning committee for 5 years, specifically has a rule in the local, current extant local plan, albeit out of date, that you can't essentially build in non-sustainable locations, and by doing that you're actually causing villages to die because people aren't living there anymore, so the shops close and all that sort of stuff. So I ideally, when you've got everybody in the village, including the parish council, saying why can't we have these 10 passive house style houses on the field on the edge of the village, and the planners say no, that's not good enough. And I guess just go back to the MPPF, Millie mentioned it, but the fact that you can't override the standards now is a big problem. We had huge aspirations to do what many other councils have done and put in better quality, in terms of water consumption, in terms of renewables. You can't do that anymore, which is a real nuisance.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of tragedy there. You've glossed over that quickly, but I think from a sort of national CPRE point of view, I just don't understand that. You want to do better than the average, and you're told you can't. It's just madness. Anyway, I'll move on. I wanted to address something about scale. So you mentioned quite a lot about spatial development strategies. I think they're a huge opportunity to get right, and somebody else in the chat mentioned about working at catchment scale. And in all of these conversations, we're talking about joining up various different approaches to how we use land. That seems to be one of the central premises of a lot of the presentations. How do we make sure, what is the right scale do you think? We won't be able to get around everyone, but what do you think the right scale to make the best uses of the best decisions for nature and for where we put housing and other development? And I guess the other thing I want to ask is, how do we make SDSs? This is probably for the politicians. How do we make SDSs more than where do you put houses? So I might come to you later, but just a couple on the right scale. Matt, have you got a view on scale maybe to get around? And what do you, that catchment point, just briefly, if you could answer that one.
Well, I mean, from a natural resources point of view, of course, it rains everywhere. But you don't want to build homes. So whilst it rains everywhere, so that's great from a harnessing nature point of view, you don't really want to build homes where the groundwater table reaches ground level at all, because that just causes all sorts of problems that are pretty impossible to solve. So I would say anywhere that is not going to, anywhere could capture the rain, but not everywhere is a safe place to drain. So you don't want to be near rivers or near high groundwater areas. But everywhere does rain on everywhere, so that's great from a resources point of view. So from a water perspective, there's quite a lot of options, but there's a few constraints that we shouldn't be building homes near.
Great, helpful. Maria, while we still got you, landscape scale. What does landscape mean in terms of scale? Where's the best way? What's the best scale to plan how a landscape and a place should develop?
Landscape scale is a commonly used term, but very poorly defined. And I don't think anybody actually has the answer, and it means different things to different people. I think it does depend on what you're considering. So Matt's point about catchment scale, in terms of landscape function, that's really crucial, because what happens upstream affects things downstream. So catchments are something that we do commonly reference in our assessments, because when we describe these landscapes, they're not it's just a description. They don't operate in isolation. So it is really important to look at the relationships between different landscapes, and catchments is one way to do that, but there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think you do need to consider the whole, which is very challenging. And I'm not sure if the planning system currently does it very well. I think it's down to the individual expertise of people whether it's done well or not. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
no, but it's maybe a kind of just a good feed into actually Millie or Nick, just one of you to answer this, but just in terms of the whole and making sure in your conversations with your neighbours the opportunity of spatial development strategies is about the whole. Are you hopeful that it will be?
I think it can work, and I think in answer to your question, it's not just about building houses. It's very important. It's not just a big local plan. If you start with looking for Wessex as a geography is for economically in terms of our marine and coastal economy, our defence and aerospace, our rural businesses, our visitor economy, and then you can actually identify those areas, and the housing will follow those areas rather than the other way around. And also, obviously, it gives you huge opportunities to improve your transport infrastructure. We need to get cars off the road as well, and also it helps in terms of environmental recovery. So in our slides, it is an STS must identify where bits the no-go zones, the strategic green and blue infrastructure, set aside areas for rewilding and landscape, and there's a whole lot of other stuff as well. But it's a big opportunity, and we're already meeting as an SDS and setting it up, and we're just waiting for the government to sign off on our geography, which has just been slightly delayed, but hopefully within a few months, and then we can start work, and that will inform the local plans we're all four of us are working on as well.
Yeah, no, okay. I wanted to ask a question about we're waiting for the final sign off on the future home standards, and we've done a lot of work at CPRE on the mandatory inclusion of solar panels on new homes, thanks to some support across the country. But if you had the opportunity to make one change and I would just leaning heavily into what you were saying about water, but if there was one mandatory change you could make, there's a really good question from Richard Thomas, I think, about so much of this feels voluntary and about guidance led rather than mandatory change. But one mandatory change in the future home standard for building regulations, what would you want to see to make new builds more nature positive? Matt, should we start with you? Because I think you've got a ready-made answer.
Well, yeah, sadly it's two answers. Mandate rainwater harvesting, as they do in Belgium, and then enforce charging for services provided off-site, in other words, on drainage. The two of them would transform the watery side of development. So sorry, it's two answers, but it's two services. So.
No, I get it. Yeah. Imogen, you have one magic wand on the future home standard. What would you do to ensure lots of chat at the moment about Swift's bricks and all the rest of it, but what would you do if you could do one thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, have to say, 100% familiar with the future home standard, so possibly I'm going a bit wider than it, but sort of green space, accessible green space close to where people live is incredibly important. And this doesn't have to be sort of nature reserve standard. Actually, people get a huge amount of enjoyment about the tiniest area that is just peaceful to sit and enjoy nature in. So certainly would want to see something around that. If you're talking about actual buildings themselves, then absolutely there's a huge campaign around Swift bricks and something that can be done around that. And I think a lot of traction around it, so it may happen.
Yeah, no, thank you. Let's just take that, Millie, maybe come to you on this one. Just I just think that in terms of getting the fabric of new development right, what might you pick out that you definitely want to see done differently?
There are quite a few things, because what we've seen is a real change in permitted development over the last few years, and changes in those standards. I think for me, it would really be around energy. I'm a big fan of community energy schemes, making sure that we have resilience in the climate crisis that we're facing, and ensuring that homes are harvesting their own energy as they should be doing with water. So things like heat pumps, solar panels, and making them accessible and part of the initial build. That for me would be where we can make a real difference, alongside things like really good insulation, where we've seen standards really drop over the years.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? I
Yeah,
totally agree
yeah.
with Millie. And you shouldn't be saying you just need solar panels and things. You should actually be looking at something like a maximum space heating demand, and so similar to the way passive house works. So you make them really hard to heat in the first place, because they don't they don't need to be low carbon. You just build things that are basically good for the people who live in them. It really does my head in that we're building stuff now which you're going to need to upgrade in 5-10 years time, because they're just being built to the lowest possible standards, and it's wrong. So
yeah, no, it's a sort of tragedy that you can build so much better than what is actually served to people. There's quite a few questions about enforcement and regulation. So, quite a lot of, and you brought it up, Matt, around SUDs, and swales being often poorly managed. And a slight sense of, real hard-pressed local authorities have had a lot of that enforcement kind of capability taken away through. I just wondered if people wanted to talk about, I was just picking up on the Sheffield research, and if they had been here, that sense of broken promises on a lot of environmental commitments is clear and real in their research. I just wondered, what more can we do to make sure that developers do what they say they're going to do, given that most of them quit and run as soon as the homes are sold?
So just to jump in from a local authority perspective, not many people know, but planning enforcement is a non-statutory service. We do not need to provide it. So on a local level, considering we're also under significant pressure within our finances, we've got to find another 15 million a year. I would not be surprised if we see planning enforcement being served up as one of those savings that comes forward. I think there needs to be, I think the work that Cllr and Malcolm have done into this is absolutely fascinating, and actually we need real enforcement, I would say, from a national level, a way in which these things can be properly challenged without it falling onto the shoulders of local people to take a challenge themselves under judicial review or whatever mechanism is available. I think there's a real hole here within the planning system that isn't going to be filled anytime soon, and certainly not within the National Planning Policy Framework or within the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, because it just doesn't address it.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else? Matt, you brought this up in your presentation a little bit.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult when you have to start providing a service to the customers who are living in the homes, and the developer is then kind of let off the hook, in that you can't then stop providing the customers with a water supply or drainage service, and the pressure is on to take on ownership of the assets, and the assets haven't been built well. I mean, everything built below ground doesn't get the attention it needs because it's covered up quickly, and what we're seeing now, of course, is a new wave of new appointments of wholesalers, not Wessex Water, who are the new water companies serving these new developments. So we're fragmenting it into a short-term thing, and it's not a short-term thing, it's long-term infrastructure, and things that are built shoddily that need to last many, many years are a complete disaster. So the strengthening the powers to not accept things would be wonderful, but sadly we don't have that, and the pressure is often on just to take it, and then we end up with problems in years to come.
Yeah. No. Anybody else want to jump in on this one? Let's move on. A couple more, and then I'll close, honestly, because I think people probably want to go to bed, or at least get something to eat. one thing on multifunctional land use. So a kind of fancy way of talking about land can do more than one thing. And lots of questions in the chat about farming. And I haven't gone there because this is a conversation about planning and nature. But clearly land can do more than one thing at a time. And in our thinking strategically about what land can do. So I guess one of the question I had for you, Imogen, to start with you is, can you deliver 30 by 30 on farmland, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think the point of 30 by 30 is that the land that is within the 30% needs to be managed with a primary objective for nature. It doesn't mean it can't also produce food. And a lot of our best habitats need, for example, grazing with livestock to maintain themselves. But there are obviously certain practices that that aren't going to work out and be sort of compatible. But in Dorset, I mean, we have some fantastic examples of farms that have gone down a regenerative route, are working in a nature-friendly way, and probably you wouldn't map every single sort of acre of their farm as being part of 30 by 30. They wouldn't want it for a start, but actually nature is sort of able to be permeate through the whole farm, and you certainly find 30% of those particular farms would be managed primarily for nature as well as producing food. And there's a really interesting piece of research that was done in part through the Nature Friendly Farming Network, in part through the wildlife trusts, looking at what they call maximum sustainable output. And unlike the Sheffield research, I do know that some of these farms were in Dorset that they looked at. And it was something along the lines of, there's only so much sort of money that you can put in and still sort of profitably increase your yield, whereas things like the sun and water are free resources that perhaps haven't been quite used in the way that they should be. And they're there, and you can actually find a really useful balance between what you're putting in and what you're getting out. That is a maximum sort of profitability, and it is below the level that you would sort of get your absolute maximum sort of yield out of it, but you haven't got these ongoing environmental damage and essentially sort of putting off the problems into the future that's going to cost future generations money. So there's research around there that shows what a sort of profitable, sustainable, environmentally friendly farming system could look like.
And you can do more than one thing on the same patch of land. Yeah. I'm going to end with a question that's coming quite late on, but I think it's a nice one, which is, and I'll try and get a quick round robin on this one, which is from John Sloper, and it's about how much, I mean, I'll paraphrase it badly, I'm sure, but how much do we have to do things differently? How much do we have to change as people and the way we operate together, as well as the infrastructure? So the infrastructure will do some piece, but there's a really nice bit in what he says is about, we need to improve our social and connection and independence. There's another great quote from earlier from Christopher Colville about the huge role that nature plays in improving mental health. And actually, we've got a bunch of different needs, and thinking differently about place and about nature can if we think about them not in boxes, but if we think it all together, I'm sure we could come up with some better answers. So I guess the central question is, do we have to think about the way we're going to live as well differently? Let's quickly go around the table on that. Nick, do you want to kick us off on that one?
I would agree. Yes, paradigm shift is necessary, but it's not as easy as that. And you do have to remember that many of our residents are living in a cost of living crisis, hand to mouth, and it's all very well saying you need solar panels, you need to recycle more, you need to eat organic food, all that sort of stuff. The reality is these people can't afford it, and it's difficult, and I think we need to recognise that.
Great, thank you, Millie. Let's go to you.
I read Dawn's question in the Q&A, and I was going to start writing an answer, but thought I'd probably take way too long. But I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. I think as a nation, we've become quite sick in some of our dependencies and how we feel we should be living, compared to where we actually see some countries with the best life, with the best sort of health outcomes, with the best sense of well-being, with the best happiness ratings. And what we actually need to do is create that vision for what do we want, how do we want to live, and then how do we do do it. And an example of that, for example, is some of our really ambitious plans within the local transport plan. Fundamentally, we need to take a shift from getting out of our cars and using more sustainable transport. I know that's easy for me to say as a non-rural area in an urban area, but the wider outcomes that will benefit everyone, particularly around health, particularly around that a bit, being outside, enjoying nature, seeing what's around you, and reducing things like the poor air quality that we've got, the heat within our towns and cities, less dependence on this sort of concrete jungle. I think that's what we really need to be shifting our mindset to. And it's very difficult. I think, and Nick's right, people don't have time to worry about these things. They're incredibly busy getting on with their lives. But I think that's where our role comes in, to think broader and to sort of try and sell a vision to residents of what could be achieved and how we could live if we all work together and really set our minds to it, and wanted the best for everyone, really.
Thanks, Millie. Briefly, just from the other three. So, Maria, a quick one from you on this one. Do we need to think differently about how we live?
I think so. It's interesting if you think about sort of the carrot and the stick approach, I guess, and I feel like there's a lot of stick in terms of policies or social drivers saying you should do this, you should do that, but it's more about making things passively easier. So I think in the context of new developments, that's where you make the interconnectedness between nature and active travel and the landscape to make it part of living in a place, and that then leads to people taking ownership of that place and makes it keeps it a great place to live, because that's what divides a good place to live and a bad place to live is how much people care about it and how much people want to be there.
Yeah, no, cracking point. Yeah. Briefly from Matt and Imogen to finish us off.
I think building the right infrastructure is a great start, but then I think you also need education. People need to understand the impact they are having on nature and the environment. And I don't think we do enough to explain to people what that impact is. It's always someone else, someone over there, and I'm paying them to do it. Whereas personal responsibility is critical. We can't do everything for everyone. We have to make them aware of their impact, and there has to be that whole education thing so people take more responsibility. So a citizenship approach to the natural resources that we're consuming.
Yeah, thank you. And lastly to Imogen.
Yeah, I think it's a combined effort. I mean, people tell us, all these surveys, that nature is vital and important to them. So people see nature as a necessity. Policy needs to make nature see it as not a luxury, and to see it as that necessity, and make those adjustments, the sorts of things we've been talking about all evening, so that the decisions are easy, and all of the other comments that people have made.
Thank you. And thank you to all our speakers for such thoughtful presentations, but also for being so generous with your time with their questions. We could have gone on for a bit longer, but I promised I'd finish at 9:30 and I'm already over. So there's one final suggestion in the chat that I just wanted to highlight, and I think it's such a lovely idea that given in Malcolm Tate's name, we should start a campaign to ensure endorsement enforcement happens in the future. What a great idea, given the tragic news we started with. But thank you all. I wanted to do a huge thanks as well to CPRE Dorset for facilitating and setting up today. It's been a really fantastic, especially to Linda for kind of making sure it all happens. Thank you for being so generous, audience, with your questions. As I say, we'll get back to you as many as possible, but the chat has been buzzing with Q&A. So great to hear all of that feedback too. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of you. But finally, thanks again to all our speakers, and have a great evening, everybody. Bye-bye.